A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
When we first adopted Max, our loyal golden retriever, I never imagined I'd be here telling such an inexplicable story. Max had always been your textbook definition of a good dog, obedient, friendly, and most importantly, silent unless barking at birds or whining for a treat. As he aged, Max slowed down, his rich golden fur turning silver, much like prize trophies tarnishing over time. Despite that, he remained sharp, always knowing when it was time for his evening walk or when food was served. However, last winter, something strange began to happen. Max had started exhibiting behaviors not typical of old age or even common dog behavior, or at least not typical in my experience. It started with subtle changes, like staring at dark corners of the room, his eyes tracing invisible patterns on the walls. I chalked it up to old age, maybe his sight was going after all. But then, one cold night in January, I heard it, a sound that sent chills crawling up my spine. I lay in bed, caught between the cusp of dreamland and waking reality, when a whispered voice shattered the silence. "Help me," it said, so soft I thought it might have been the wind. But the wind doesn't whisper in English, and it doesn't come from the foot of your bed. The hair on my neck stood on end when I realized the voice had an uncanny resemblance to Max's barks, soft yet guttural. I was about to dismiss it as some bizarre trick of a dream when Max, lying at the foot of my bed, whined softly, his eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that screamed urgency. I shook my head, convinced I was reading too much into it, yet a part of me couldn't shake the feeling there was more to this. Every night, without fail, the voice returned, each time more distressed. "Please, help me," it pleaded, and I began to wonder if Max was trying to communicate something. The whispers were clearer now, but always just on the periphery of understanding, like an incomplete puzzle. I started recording these occurrences, thinking maybe I could catch something definitive, but every playback only echoed the hollow silence of my darkened bedroom. My friends laughed off my concerns, teasing that I watched too many horror movies, but the whispers were relentless, a nightly ritual I dreaded. I conducted some research about animals sensing paranormal activities, but the accounts I found were either inconclusive or clearly made for entertainment. Desperation led me to try other avenues. I brought in a psychic, a last resort for a skeptic like me. When she entered the house, her demeanor shifted, a wave of unease crossed her face. "There's something unsettled here," she murmured, focusing on Max, who sat by my side, uncharacteristically calm despite the stranger's presence. She closed her eyes, reaching out to him spiritually, her brows knitting. "He wants to help you. To protect you," she said, eyes springing open in a manner that made her look far older than her years. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but the seriousness in her gaze cut through my disbelief. Then one night, the voice changed, no longer a plea, rather a warning, "It takes breath away." Those words wrapped around me with icy tendrils. That day an ominous feeling settled over me, an anticipation of something dreadful. I checked every lock, walked through every room as if searching for an invisible intruder. With each sweep, Max followed, unusually silent, maintaining his vigil. Night came, draping shadows over my mind. I lay awake, counting the minutes, waiting for the whisper when an abrupt series of thumps echoed through the house, as if someone had dropped heavy books upstairs. Adrenaline surged through me, every sensible force imploring me to stay put. Yet, it was Max, darting towards the source with newfound energy, that pulled me along. Together, we ascended the stairs, my heart a drumbeat in my chest. I flicked on the hallway light, which swung eerily as if debating remaining on or plunging us back into darkness. We entered the guest bedroom, which I rarely used, a room preserved like a snapshot of a distant memory. The air was stifling, cloying, and a vague shadow lingered at the corner prompted by the thin moonlight slipping through the curtains. Max growled, a low rumble that resonated the understanding of a defender. My own breath felt heavy, time stretching impossibly as I strained my eyes to see what he was seeing. With sudden clarity, it appeared, a silhouette, not entirely humanoid, standing there, vague, menacing. Panic seared through me, an urge to flee screaming through my limbs, but I stood frozen, unable to look away. The shape moved suddenly, jerkily, and something in Max shifted too. He lunged, his body ignoring the weariness of age, barking with fervor I'd never seen before, driving the shadow back, away from me, as if physically manifesting his own protective aura. In the chaos, I grabbed a flashlight, casting a blinding beam across the room. The shadow dissipated as suddenly as it appeared, consumed by the light, leaving behind only the echoes of that haunting whisper. I sat on the floor, heart pounding fiercely, Max beside me, his breath heavy yet satisfied, a guardian whose duty knows no bounds. From that night, the whispers ceased, the dark corners of the room no longer a source of silent terror. It seems Max, with whatever wisdom or connection he had to this world and possibly the next, had sensed the danger and stood by me through it all. The thought of a spirit reaching out, using my old dog as a conduit to communicate, was beyond my every understanding, yet undeniably real. In Max's silence, the unspoken bond between us grew stronger, a testament to his unwavering loyalty. Still, sometimes, in the stillness of night, I find myself lingering in that guest room doorway, wondering if the shadows will whisper again, knowing that should they return, I won't be facing them alone. It's strange how you can get used to living with a shadow, like the void left by my sister's death 10 years ago that swallowed most of our family. Laura's passing was the tragedy that everyone in our small town seemed to acknowledge quietly while collectively turning a blind eye to the painful truth. She vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but her favorite sneakers on the riverbank and unanswered questions stifling any conversation. Despite the lack of closure, the community rallied around my parents, and in the cocoon of silence, life moved on, or at least pretended to. I was only 14 when it happened. Her disappearance cast a long, cold shadow over my adolescence that never seemed to lift. My parents were never the same, lost in their own bruised worlds of coping. They left me to twist and grow like a neglected willow bending toward the last vestiges of warmth. A decade later, I thought I'd seen the last of any fresh pain. Then, the unsettling news reports started. I stumbled upon the first one late on a Thursday night, when a guilty bout of insomnia had me flipping through channels, hoping for something boring enough to lull me to sleep. Instead, I froze, paralyzed by disbelief and an eerie sense of recognition, as the reporter's grave voice narrated a story I never expected to hear, let alone with such haunting conviction. It was a reopening of my sister's case, broadcasted without any warning. The anchor recited details that sent a jolt of alarm through my core, information that was chilling in its rightness yet deeply disturbing in its revelation. Laura Jarvis, aged 17, disappeared on a crisp October evening, leaving little but her worn Converse on the Sydney River shore, the voice droned. But then it twisted into something intimate and almost sinister as it added details of her last known frames on a CCTV, showing more of her evening walk than we'd ever been told, where she'd lingered, whom she might have met. I sat glued to the television screen, the all-too-familiar ache in my chest morphing into something spikier, as if pieces of truth were trying to pierce my denial's cloak. Intrusive, indeed, as the report trespassed through memories I had carefully buried, unpacks parts of our family's history intertwined with the town's secrets and whispers I was never privy to. I was about to share this new anguish with my parents when the air shifted around me, the TV's neon hue the only company in the thick silence. Something was deeply amiss. These channels never reported such cases so thoroughly, certainly not rekindling old fires with such precision. The days slithered by with more peculiar broadcasts following, hushed narratives of encounters long forgotten, as if the television were a spectral storyteller reviving a ghost with every headline. It didn't stop at rehashing events already woven into my bones, it began revealing pieces no outsider should have known. Detailed accounts of Laura's closed-door confessions about an unseen tormentor, revelations startling in their specificity, ones that struck nerves only a sibling could feel resonating with guilt and credence. Suddenly, everyone knew about the bruises she'd brushed off as clumsiness, the uncharacteristic lateness after school. Local media feasted on this newly acquired morbid interest, and I felt the town buzz with a grotesque kind of excitement, a revived thrill of a decade-old mystery. Something peculiar was intertwined with these reports. They didn't just enlighten, they planted seeds of paranoia. Living in a town where privacy is both respected and resented, these broadcasts were not only salt on the wound but a scalpel cutting through carefully healed seams. I found myself drawn into a rabbit hole of news clippings, editorials riddled with veiled accusations, and blurry video analyses that had cropped up on online forums. It was as if some unseen hand was puppeteering from the shadows, orchestrating a symphony of madness tuned to my sister's frequency. The real horror, however, wasn't just the unearthed past. It was the chilling accuracy of these reports that got under my skin. Details I hadn't even been privy to, moments that no one but Laura could have known. It was as if the veil between life and death had worn thin, her tale being spun anew from the fibers of some ghostly ether. I debated reaching out to the network, but each time I lifted the phone, an inexplicable dread seized my courage. Some part of me urged that pushing for answers might open doors best left closed, doors I wasn't sure I could bear peeking behind. But the questions clawed at the back of my mind, ravenous. How could they know? Was this some cruel joke, an elaborate invigilation set to rip open old wounds for the sake of salacious consumption? It was after the third week of sporadic, disquieting broadcasts, when a stranger's face flashed across the screen, claiming to be privy to Laura's last moments, that I was hit with a more petrifying thought. Perhaps my sister's story was no longer hers alone, trapped somewhere, caught in the currents of a narrative not even death could quell. Or perhaps, more haunting yet, she was reaching out, through the static layers of time and space, a broadcast not from some sensational agency, but from beyond our sentient scope, bidding us to pay heed. And as I sat, entranced in the eerie glow of my living room with thoughts curling like smoke toward an unexplainable conclusion, I knew this was far more than the sear echoes of a cold case. It was Laura's final plea, straining against the tide of time, hoping her truth would at last, after years of silence, come effulgent and complete. When I learned of my younger daughter Jenny's engagement, I couldn't have been prouder, a feeling every father dreams of. Her fiancé, Dave, was a charming, humble guy who seemed to adore her. They'd met in college, he was quirky but had a backbone and heart of gold. As the father of the bride, I embraced the ceremonial duty with joy. We booked the most enchanting vineyard for the event, and I promised Jenny we'd cover every expense, an indulgence I never imagined offering any of my children. This was my little girl's fairy tale, and I was determined to make it a reality. However, I never anticipated the chilling unraveling of family bonds that it would stir beneath its glossy surface, twisting happiness into something hauntingly unrecognizable. My eldest daughter, Ella, had always been more restrained, favoring pragmatic choices over fanciful ones. She had married her childhood sweetheart, Mark, in a modest church ceremony 4 years prior. Theirs was a different kind of story, no extravagance, just simple and pure. We offered to contribute, but Ella, valuing independence, insisted she and Mark handle the costs. We respected their decision, never suspecting it would plant seeds of apprehension that would later flourish into ominous tension. The first tremor of discontent arrived when Ella phoned me 2 months before the wedding, her voice strained, hinting at some underlying frustration that lurked beneath polite conversation. She inquired subtly, "Dad, you're covering all of Jenny's wedding, right?" Affirmation on my part was met with a pause, a telling silence loaded with unspoken words. As the wedding preparations continued, subtle oddities began to manifest. Ella, who had always been supportive of her sister, grew more withdrawn. I'd catch her observing the cascading rolls of white silk or the ornate arrangements, her expression betraying a struggle she was trying desperately to mask. One night, sitting in the backyard where we had shared countless stories, I confronted her about it, pleading for honesty. Ella confessed feelings of being slighted, of an inequity that shattered the sisterly camaraderie they once shared. It was as if my decision to finance Jenny's nuptials had rewritten the narrative of Ella's simpler union, painting it in lesser shades. I promised we'd help with a grand anniversary party to even things out, but the wounds seemed deeper than I understood. The evening before the wedding, in the dim light of an autumn twilight, things began to unravel more sinisterly. Strange occurrences, things missing, misplaced, and even small accidents, started haunting the household, sowing nervousness that none of us could ignore. Jenny's veil vanished, then mysteriously reappeared on Ella's dresser, delicate lace shredded as if caught in a thorny snare. Jenny was understandably upset, but Ella firmly denied any involvement, the accusation bringing her to tears. I was torn between my daughters, caught in a tempest where logic was elusive. Ella's denials, though fervent, were overshadowed by an air of underlying tension, the kind you cannot touch, but feel crawling up your spine. On the day of the wedding, a fog crept in, unseasonal and ominous, clinging to the vineyard like a ghost reliving old sorrows. A sense of unease settled over the attendees, a chill that dulled the bright chatter of guests into muted whispers. The moment Jenny appeared, radiant and full of love, a horrifying moment shattered the celebration. As she walked down the aisle, the music stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. Ella, sitting in the front row, seemed utterly transfixed, her eyes wide in disbelief, focusing on something invisible to us all. In the eerie quiet, the chandelier overhead began to flicker, casting grotesque shadows that warped jubilant expressions into masks of dread. Then, just as quickly, it fell, crashing down in a deafening, heart-stopping instant. Chaos erupted, people screamed and ducked for cover. Miraculously, no one was hurt, but the terror of the moment left its mark. Among the ensuing pandemonium, Ella lied sprawled on the grass, eyes shut tight, as if battling demons no one else could perceive. It was then that she spoke, her voice laced with something far more sinister than sibling rivalry. "It's not just jealousy, Dad. It's the house. It knows. Despite my logical mind screaming to dismiss it, an eerie familiarity washed over me. I recalled how, soon after moving into the house after Ella's birth, the previous owners had warned us of strange energies. We laughed it off as superstitions. Ella's return to the house for the wedding had been enough to reignite whatever had lain dormant, her unspoken fears now manifesting as a force we could no longer ignore. Decades-old latent resentments and fears had found a vessel in Ella's jealousy, harbored so deep that they stirred malevolent whispers within these walls. Haunted by the weight of unwitting neglect and the undeniable presence that had preyed on Ella's dormant insecurities, we fled from the vineyard, abandoning the cursed celebration. We stayed in a hotel that night, shaken to our very cores. The experience forged a fragile peace among us, united in facing something darker and unknown. As Jenny and Dave settled for a quiet courthouse marriage, the looming specter of the house in that day's horror stood as a reminder of a cost that went far beyond the payment for a wedding. Relationships tested and spirits awaken, a family struggled to find healing under the shadow of an ancient malevolence, leaving me to wonder, am I the asshole for paying for one daughter's wedding? Or was it something monstrous lurking, waiting for the moment we let our guard down? For 15 years, I've delved into the shadows, capturing whispers of the unseen, always shuffling in the periphery. I've brushed with the cold drafts of haunted corridors, heard the phantom murmurings in abandoned homes, and witnessed flickers of presences that elude tangible reality. Ghosts, ghouls, apparitions, none have escaped my diligent ears and eyes. Each encounter reinforced a belief in their existence, their ethereal persistence in our world. My equipment, an assortment of digital recorders, EMF meters, and thermal cameras, had become extensions of myself. Over the years, I built a reputation, embracing every chilling encounter, relishing each spectral tale. Until, on a routine investigation, I faced something that shattered my understanding of paranormal. It began with an innocuous invitation from an old friend, Phoebe. "I've stumbled upon something peculiar," she wrote. Her words had the characteristic subtleties of understated horror, a promise of excitement. She spoke of a derelict mansion on the outskirts of a town forgotten by time, where the locals whispered warnings of cursed land. Eager to dive in, I seized my gear and drove through the veil of night, arriving at its crumbling gates. Vines suffocated the structure, and shattered windows yawned into darkness, promising secrets within. Inside, dust particles danced in slices of moonlight pouring through holes in the roof, each step echoing an ancient lament. Phoebe was already there, a silhouette framed by shadows, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling fervor. "It feels alive in here," she said, a mixture of thrill and fear painting her voice. As we navigated the labyrinth of decay, the air shimmered with a static energy I hadn't encountered before. I began setting up my equipment, my familiarity grounding me in the face of Phoebe's growing unease. It was then we found the room, a library, its shelves sagging under a weight of forgotten books. But it wasn't the tomes that drew our attention, it was the mirror on the far wall. Tall, with a tarnished gold frame etched with cryptic symbols, it emitted its own presence, almost beckoning. Our reflection seemed normal at first glance, but then I noticed it, a flicker at the corner of my eye, an odd shift in light. My heart skipped as I focused on the mirror, watching our reflection subtly alter, like a film reel glitching, splices of scenes overlapping reality. Phoebe approached it tentatively, her fingers grazing the cold surface. That's when the mirror splashed a vision, a rift opening to a howling void. Ghastly faces twisted in silence beyond, eyes wide with malevolent hunger, puppeted by invisible strings, as if trapped eternally in their own horrors. The connection was too fast, too fierce to comprehend, yet before I could pull her back, Phoebe was gone, vanished, swallowed whole into whatever dimension this horror belonged. I was left staring at my own reflection, now standing beside those wretched specters, my heart pounding as I tried to force my mind into understanding. This was no ghost story. This was something far worse. Envisioning her trapped, forever circling in that nowhere, fed my urgency with panic. I lunged for the mirror, hands pressing against its cold surface, screaming for Phoebe, for anything, but the portal didn't yield to my will. The mirror stared back, indifferent. Days faded without sense. Sleepless, my attempts to control my equipment failed, nothing functioned to pierce the veil that took her. I became a prisoner of this reality, haunted by the memory of those ghastly expressions. When the locals came, drawn by my absence, my incoherent babbling drove them away. They sealed the mansion, fearful of the unknown. Yet, my purpose intensified, no longer satisfied with files on entities or reflections in passing. Phoebe's presence demanded restitution, demanded an understanding beyond the ethereal. The mirror remains my bridge to that other side, the tangible quest from my intangible tales. Some nights, I feel it vibrate with an energy impossible to ignore, a scream not from the past but from futures twisted into black spectacles. I've dedicated myself to unraveling its secrets, because now, in those frantic attempts to reach beyond, I wish all the benign specters of mirror lore were indeed all I had to fear, for within that mirror lies something far more voracious than any mere ghost, a hunger for souls, a manifestation of terrors once whispered around campfires, the true horrors lingering amidst our desperate night. I always thought the stories about zombies were folklore or, at best, cautionary tales woven by overzealous scientists warning us about the next supervirus. Little did I know that I'd be stumbling into one of these tales when I took a shortcut through the abandoned Rutherford Mall on my way home from the night shift. The place had been shut down for years, a ghostly relic of our city's past glories, now prepping for demolition. I didn't think much about my decision at first. It had been another long shift at the factory, and I was eager to get back to my small apartment and crash. The mall was my shortcut, a dusty and forgotten labyrinth of old stores, but it shaved off a good 20 minutes from my walk. I pushed through a vandalized entrance, its glass door shattered ages ago, the edges glittered ominously in the dim moonlight. As I trudged past what once was a bustling center court, the eerie silence got under my skin, the kind that prickled and whispered at the edges of sanity. I pulled my jacket tighter as I kept my eyes peeled for any signs of trouble, secretly amused by how we'd all been imprinted with danger from an early age about these decrepit places. Wind whipped through the hollow halls, making old flyers dance ghostly around what had been the center fountain, now dry and cracked. That's when I heard it, an otherworldly groan echoing through the vast emptiness, bouncing off faded mall maps and advertisements for obsolete products. For a second, I froze, hoping it was just the wind pushing against some forgotten corner of the building. But then, there was a clatter, like something metallic had been knocked over. My heart rate shot up, but rationality took charge. Probably just a raccoon or some stray animal, I assured myself. Placing one cautious foot in front of the other, I crept towards the origin of the sound, curiosity winning over caution. In the stillness of the shopping mall, I rounded a corner with caution. And there it was, an unsteady shadow looming under the flickering emergency lights left over from the days when people roamed these halls without fear. It was hunched over, ragged breaths infecting the air. My stomach churned as it lifted its head, eyes as vacant as a cloudy sky, devoid of any spark of humanity. This wasn't a person, not anymore, anyway. Rotting skin clung to bones like old meat abandoned for vultures, clothes hanging in dirty, shredded layers. It let out another guttural noise, the kind that shatters whatever courage you foolishly thought you had amassed. The stories I'd heard growing up and in whispers at work surged through me, tales of wandering undead in small, forgotten towns, viral outbreaks that authorities quickly shut down claiming exaggerated paranoia. Was this it? Evidence of some government cover-up, a silent invasion that was happening in the shadow of ignorance? As it staggered one unsteady step towards me, my senses kicked into overdrive. The half-bad zombie clichés from pop culture laughed at my petrified form, luring me with scenarios of heroism, a failed illusion of safety that dies the instant you're faced with something not scripted. I backed away slowly, the instinct of fight or flight firmly fixed on the latter. It didn't follow immediately, stuck in its small radius of reality, but its vacant eyes tracked me, cementing the fear that it was aware, at least enough to register my presence. In that split-second decision, I knew I had to alert someone, anyone, who would believe a tale like this, warn them of what remained only whispers until now. Running back through the mall, I half expected more of them to appear out of vending machines or crawl spaces. The rusty escalator, dead from years of neglect, seemed more like monstrous teeth ready to devour moonlit shadows. My breath wheezed and my chest felt like it might explode by the time I burst out onto the street again, gulping down air as though it might be my last. The world outside was oblivious, just as it had been when I entered, and it chilled me to the bone. I contemplated calling the police, but how do you frame this without sounding like a raving lunatic? "Hello, officer, I just saw a zombie in an abandoned mall." "No, really, I'm serious." As the adrenaline coursed through my veins, I hesitated, head in hands under a flickering street lamp, knowing that this was the sort of situation that past me would have brushed off or mocked in a chat room. The rational part of my brain argued it must have been a homeless person, perhaps afflicted by some horrible illness, a victim of circumstances so devastating they slipped through every available safety net. Yet, deep down, between the fear and disbelief, something else nagged at me. I had seen enough to know that what I apprehended was not something simple. The image of those cloudy eyes bared a scar on my memory that no logical explanation could erase. As I finally gathered my wits enough to head home, avoiding dark alleys and secluded routes. I wondered if this was a singular encounter or the beginning of something darker. As I slipped inside my apartment and deadbolted the door, the thought wouldn't leave me. Maybe tomorrow, or a week from now, this would all end up being a misunderstood myth, or maybe, just maybe, it was a warning, waiting to unravel into our unsuspecting lives. I first noticed the ads, those customized, eerily precise ads, always appearing just moments after I'd thought of something but hadn't yet voiced it. Curious about tools for my garden? No sooner would the thought flit through my mind than I'd find offers for unheard-of gadgets scrolling across my screen. For the longest time, I wrote it off as coincidence or the sheer magic of digital marketing sorcery. But things took a dark turn last year when I stumbled onto a subreddit dedicated to delving into the mysteries of the digital world. One post caught my eye, titled "The Algorithm That Predicts Death," dismissed by most as an internet hoax, a trickery of data miners preying on the gullible. But something about it chilled me, and, skeptical as I was, I couldn't shake it off. The notion that an algorithm somewhere was collecting data, beyond just our daily movements, habits, or preferences, processing even our unconscious thoughts, estimating our very lifespan, lingered in my mind like an unwelcome guest. Intrigued, I joined a group of online enthusiasts convinced there was more to it than mere speculation. Among them was James, a data analyst, or so he claimed. Over encrypted chats, he explained that in the deep recesses of the web, whispers buzzed about a program called Chronos. Developed by a rogue faction of coders, it was designed initially to monitor health metrics, predicting illnesses based on physiological and behavioral data inputs. But, somewhere down the line, its function had warped and ventured into territories not meant for algorithms, or humans, for that matter, delving into prediction models so advanced they bordered on the prophetic. James swore he'd seen its predictions come true, exactly to the date, for several undisclosed test subjects, shared with him by a guilt-ridden scientific community defector, anonymously, of course. He described cases where changes in purchase history, subtle shifts in music tastes, and even patterns in sleep tracking data had been used to forecast mortality with ghastly accuracy. Still, I remained skeptical until he dared me to test it out. He directed me to a shadowy segment of the web, a place you'd only find if you were supposed to, he cryptically declared. My heart raced as I typed commands that shouldn't exist, letting its tentacles dig into my digital life. A crude interface popped up, eerily devoid of branding or color, just a stark command line with a date so outlandish I couldn't help but laugh. Little did I understand the gravity of playing deity with codes and statistics. Taking this matter meticulously, I decided to challenge the program, altered my lifestyle, diet, exercise, social interactions, tinkering with whatever it utilized to sculpt its dreadful forecasts. Yet, the date never wavered. It haunted my nights, lurking in the background music of my dreams, whispering its unwelcome hymns. Affected, I noticed my reflection growing pallid in tandem with the looming date, a specter threatening to suck the life birthed from pixels and paranoia. Days slipped like sand through an hourglass until only a week remained undisturbed before the ominous prediction. The smoking gun arrived via a televised emergency announcement. A string of unlikely deaths had matched a list recently leaked online by an unknown source from a classified sector of the web. It took a mere heartbeat for my blood to run cold. First were the faces, coincidentally, individuals chronicled in our clandestine group, followed by deathly quietude from a community that once thrived in fervor. The dread within our digital sanctum was palpable. At that juncture, James infrequently communicated, disjointed notions of escape and abandoning everything digital engulfed his elongated messages exhibited in haphazard timestamps. Yet, on the eve of my precipice, his last transmission arrived. Verify with someone credible existed outside the net. They will never affirm its truth because they fear their survival. More a riddle than solace, I embarked on this final quest for possible salvation. Emerging from the electronic entanglement, I confronted, and conquered, my reality through trials in temporal domains constructed by choice, not by lines imbued with arithmetic echoes. Experts dismissed my inquiries with chuckles laden with incredulity. Nonetheless, within every amplified laugh hid an alienated glimpse of acknowledgement, accompanied by the unsaid horrors of having sighted the beast within the binary jungles we erected out of ignorance. Throughout these confrontations, however, one peculiar incident, humored as a kooky subset scenario, that a defunct doctor inadvertently mentioned but quashed moments post-utterance, aroused disconcerting embers suggesting corroborated linkages to overlooked incidents align perfectly with the inadequately explained disappearances. In that thin membrane between accepted rationale and lingering enigma, I comprehended a grim existence persists, forever behind static symbols lost beyond incalculable compositions, perhaps, in a realm thriving where our understanding blurs till forsaken cognition defers to instinctual judgments. I choose otherwise, defying nature and providence, allowing a thought exist until extracted unsupervised illuminated triumph simply sailing within proximities unknown, somewhere unified beyond mortality itself, beyond the omnipresent divide sheltered by encumbered nature. Now, days become nights funneled within every tolerance beyond broken ciphers once crafted for us autodidacts keen on challenging realms we forge alone yet unparted. There's a certain peace that comes with realizing you've completely given up on yourself. No expectations, no pressure, just an unsettling nothingness. For the last 3 months, I've been living in the shell of myself, a ghost haunting its own flesh. I have no job, no friends left to pretend for, and my apartment looks like a crime scene. Once vibrant with laughter and life, it's now a shrine to my inertia, cluttered with trash and the unwelcome scent of decay. But it's not the clutter, not the joblessness, that got to me eventually. It's the empty reflection in the mirror, the dull eyes staring back, eyes that had seen too much but were too afraid to see any more. That's when I started noticing the whispers, faint and indistinct at first, like wind slipping through the cracks. They seemed to murmur from the walls, a symphony of hushed voices that crescendoed into choruses I couldn't ignore. I always had a fascination for the supernatural in my better days, you know, a fleeting interest in the ghost shows on TV, bored afternoons spent reading about paranormal theories when I should have been working. Little did I know it was preparation for the terror that would unravel my sanity. One gloomy evening, with rain battering the windows like distant drumming, I first heard them clearly, or, rather, felt more than heard, a soft susurration in my ear, as intimate as a lover's whisper. "Why haven't you fought yet?" they asked. Panic made my blood run cold, a fiery iciness that rooted me to the spot. Trembling, I turned to find an empty room wrapped in shadows, the silent answer to my fear. I tried reasoning, dismissing it as a product of my isolation breeding hallucination. Yet, night after night, the whispers persisted, with new voices adding to their eerie choir, weaving tales of regret and lost courage. I set up cameras in desperate curiosity, convinced I could prove to myself it was all in my head. What I saw instead was far more unnerving. The footage showed my apartment in grainy monochrome, static-filled and ordinary except for a faint movement. From the corner of the screen, a flicker, like the air bending, slowly turned towards the camera. As it moved, shapes formed, vague but distinct enough to outline faces twisted in silent wails, an agony caught in perpetuity. They shifted as the night progressed, flowing like ocean currents, murmuring in their ceaseless pursuit of peace. I felt I'd been imprinted on by the spectral chain, sinking with their burdens and followed by questions I could not shrug off. Was I supposed to help them? Or worse, join their ranks, another muted soul consumed by regrets? Their presence seeped into my dreams, veering them into nightmarish landscapes filled with shadowy echoes of myself, stripped of life's purpose or solace, always begging, "Take action. Fight back." I couldn't figure whether it was guilt or a genuine plea for saving myself, or them. My days bled into each other, reality smeared with doubt and dread. Yet, slowly, as if painstakingly crafted, an answer revealed itself. In a burst of feverish inspiration, or maybe desperation, I grabbed a can of spray paint and began scrawling on my dingy walls. Words flowed, ideas I'd ignored for years, concepts that seemed foolish before suddenly demanded life, a manifesto to confront the unnerving void within me. Each line translated into the fiery whispers of the haunt, a validation, a record of who I once was and maybe could be again, if I dared. As I worked, the weight of the voices lightened, their babble transforming into something akin to cheering. A quiet optimism seeped from my mind, unsettling yet wholly mine. In small defiant victories, I pried open the blinds to let slivers of sunlight invade the darkness, threw away rubbish, and cleared the space of its gloom and odor, not as acts of reclaiming my life but as reminders I still had commands. But inevitably, with each piece of baggage discarded, I expected a confrontation from my spectral companions, a reckoning or release. Instead, they diminished, leaving only a whisper of gratitude trailing the edges of my perception, as if tethered to a destiny tied directly to mine. That's when I knew, their liberation was bound to my own resolution, intricately meshed into the loud silence I had so foolishly embraced. Now, when I look in the mirror, I recognize the eyes that meet mine. They're still tired, yes, but there's a glint, a fight tethered to the stories and messages I honored on my walls. I don't claim it was easy or that I'm completely free of my haunted existence, but there's a marked difference. I'm living, not simply existing. The whispers still linger if I let my guard down, remnants of shadows born from tangled psyches. They remind me where complacency leads, where giving up buries you. But I'm no longer afraid of the work it takes to wrestle myself from despair's grip, to push beyond the whispers that urged my inaction. Though I have no grand ambitions or a perfect life mapped out ahead, whatever shape my world takes is sculpted by my hands, not drawn by phantoms. I might be a little broken, but that's all right. I've gathered my shards. From them, I'll build something new. After all, the hardest confessions are the ones whispered to yourself in the dur pit of the night, but it's also where the first seeds of change grow, echoing quietly, "Fight." Last night, I found myself clutching my phone tighter than I'd ever done before, my thumb hovering over the send button of a message that held the boundless potential to disrupt my life. It started innocently enough. A casual acquaintance, Tanya, whom I'd met at my friend Sarah's brunch, raised a few eyebrows during our brief encounters. Blue streaks highlighting her hair in an almost unsettlingly perfect fashion, always dressed to the nines, Tanya was the type who commanded the room's attention with her eccentric tales. But it was during a pause in the laughter, her gaze fixed dreamily ahead, when she carelessly mentioned she was a total klepto. The words lingered in the air with a flippancy that seemed both a challenge and a confession, leaving us to wonder how much truth sat hidden beneath it. A laugh, part jest and part intrigue followed, but it marked her differently in my mind, like a curious new color you hadn't noticed before in the spectrum. I didn't pay much heed to it until a few weeks later when Sarah proposed another gathering, a dinner party at my place this time. The suggestion of inviting Tanya sat at the edge of our conversation like a dare waiting to be acknowledged. As my fingers tapped the details of the event into the group chat, Tanya's addition felt like a pinprick on my conscience. I'm not usually one to define people by idle, boastful remarks, but there was something about how Tanya had said those words, how she wore them like a chic accessory to her quirky personality, that unsettled me. She had a charisma that could enchant, an off-kilter warmth that could mislead, yet I was plagued by the image of her fingers trailing along the edges of everything in my home, possession and relinquishment dancing in the same gesture. My house, my sanctuary, filled with things that were pieces of my life, each object held memories, irreplaceable and bound to me by sentiment that could go missing without notice. It struck me then, how inviting Tanya could kindle not just chaos, but the slow burn of paranoia that could sprout from each item gone astray, each unlatched drawer, each whisper of fabric displaced. Uncertainty became my unwelcome guest long before any of them arrived. My reluctance, initially flickering like a faint ember, grew hotter as I deliberated what to feasibly tell Sarah. Would it seem irrational to uninvite her over an offhand comment? Yet, the rationale twisted unexpectedly in my gut, a serpent coiling tighter with every passing day, whispering stories of what might happen. I voiced my concern tentatively, half expecting Sarah to dismiss it with a laugh, but her reply came slower and weightier than anticipated. I wasn't alone in my apprehension, it seemed. She too had noticed things missing after her own events and had brushed it off as lost amidst chaotic mirth. She didn't scream theft, but the unsaid was there, bloated and burdensome. As we spoke, an unsettling truth surfaced. We weren't fearful of Tanya as a person, no, she was nothing if not amiable. We feared the chaos she might unwittingly or flippantly cause. This realization seemed to tangle my conscience further. Was I passing judgment on someone without allowing room for conversation, or was I sidestepping a hazard best left unsaid? I broached the subject as delicately as I could, suggesting a change of venue casually upon our next meet-up. An affirmative chorus relieved me, yet, even as plans shifted, the what-ifs pressed relentlessly at the back of my mind like a mold spreading unseen. In the spirit of honesty, I faced our mutual friends, crafting a nuanced narrative that sidestepped accusation yet allowed them to draw conclusions. Veins of skepticism wove through our exchanges, a collective agreement on airs perhaps better untangled at a later date or simply left in suspension. The night of the dinner, I hovered over my door, twice awakening with a start to what my instincts claimed were Tanya's specters skipping through shadow and cognition. Sleep came fitful and sporadic, each tick of the clock marking waterlogged seconds drowning in night's silence. I dreamed of hands, each indistinguishable from the last, leafing through my life indiscriminately, a crescendo of laughter echoing unbounded by form or clarity. Glimpses of faces blurred by grins, each one a specter cloaked in camaraderie, turned to question their very semblance of trust. In the end, an instinct persevered as a semblance of my reality reasserted itself, knotted thoughts gradually unraveling under the soft glow of dawn. Yet, with morning came no real clarity, only the weight of perspective heavy in its lessons. By then, Any clarity was relegated more to fleeting realizations than full understanding, a simple acceptance that not every social dynamic was meant to be unwoven or comprehended in graduate terms. The decision weighed on my relationships, though only lightly. It brewed the ongoing conversation of what we owed each other in trust versus practicality, a subject both nebulous and sharply outlined in modern verbiage. Some understandings, I realized, need not be fully articulated to be acknowledged, needing neither approval nor alignment to maintain their existence. In the end, life moved forward, and friendships navigated their interweavings with mindful avoidance of protruding threads too sensitive yet to unwind. My home felt a notch safer, though, paradoxically, my standing felt fractionally shaded by the lingering what-if? Echoing softly into the ether, unresolved yet perhaps rightly so. Was I the asshole for not inviting Tanya? It was a question harder to pin down than any item she might claim, alive more in the might-have-beens than the factual. Such narratives often are, echoed in the liminality of discretion and admission, threads snapping in unison with decisions taken tentatively, spirited by preservation that feels akin to both selfishness and necessity. In this space, I lingered, hoping for some semblance of reprieve in the realizations we forge in the aftermath of choices, borne by the experiences still etched against my conscience with the inevitability of stories yet penned. For as long as I can remember, there's been a dark cloud pursuing me, a whisper, really, that started one innocuous afternoon. The day was uneventful, my feet trudging through the autumn leaves that crunched beneath my soles while my mind wandered aimlessly, when suddenly, amidst the rustling of trees, I heard it, a disembodied voice softly calling my name, Eli. I stopped dead in my tracks, the world around me pausing like a film reel torn at its seams. I spun around, expecting to find some prankster or friend sneaking up with mischievous intentions. The park was empty, save for the silent sentinel of bare oaks and branches swaying lazily in the fickle wind. Dismissing the voice as an anomaly, possibly the echo of a memory or imagination's folly, I continued my journey home. It was only later, under the harsh glare of my ceiling light, did the voice return, threading through the silence of my small apartment, unraveling my sanity inch by painful inch. It wasn't always there, no. Rather, it came with moods, carried by night shadows, luring me to the windowsill where I would stare into the dark abyss, wondering if madness glanced back. It grew bold over time, striking without warning, while I brushed my teeth, busied myself with mundane routines, or even when I almost drifted to sleep, a monotonous chant brushing against my consciousness, demanding attention, Eli, it's time. What unnerved me more was not the voice itself but its familiarity that tickled the corners of long-buried memories. Desperate for peace, I sought therapy, confided in friends, sought refuge in science. Each session felt like attempting to piece together a jigsaw puzzle whose image kept changing, making each attempt more frustrating than the last. Then, Lucy, a fellow colleague with a penchant for the mystical, offered an alternative, esoteric in nature and garnished with skepticism from my side. Eli, sometimes the universe tries to communicate. Maybe you're just not willing to listen the right way, she suggested, pressing a small, worn leather notebook into my shaking hands, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and incantations for opening one's third eye or some such nonsense. I thanked her, though inwardly dismissed it. Over the next week, the voice's intensity didn't lessen, instead, its persistence reached an apex, accompanied by evenings spent on YouTube, absorbed in strange rituals, half to humor the situation, half in a bid for relief. One dreary, rain-slicked night, while an angry storm lashed vehemently against my windows, the voice came again, not as an intruder on my thoughts but a tidal wave crashing through my psyche. I clutched the notebook, Lucy's words rattling in my mind like dice in a tin can. With nothing left to lose, I chanted one of the invocations, feeling foolish, yet oddly driven by an intense curiosity. No sooner had the last word left my lips did a sensation take hold, a visceral unraveling, as if layers of my reality peeled away, leaving raw nerves exposed to the winds of chaos. Gone was the dimly lit room and in its place, a landscape of shifting shadows and indistinct forms that danced just beyond perception. In the center floated a figure, ethereal and oddly comforting, vibrating in tandem with the rhythmic thrum of my heart. I dared to reach out, the figure responding in kind, and as our consciousnesses brushed, an understanding blossomed between us, flowering under the weight of countless unspoken truths. The voice, no longer separate, hummed a symphony of familiar tunes. These weren't mere whispers in the dark, but echoes of my past, my essence reaching out over dimensions unknown, trying to forge a connection lost through the cyclical dance of rebirth and forgotten memory. Questions flooded my mind, demanding answers. Why was I experiencing this? Where did the voice come from? Flickers of past lives flashed before my eyes, lifetimes entwined with those I've never met, yet instinctively recognized as pieces in a larger puzzle. I awoke with a start, the room bathed in early morning light, pulse racing. The experience had shifted something within me, an alignment of the self that quelled the persistent voice. Though exhausting, the encounter lent me insights into my fears and existence, devoid of horror save for the loss keenly felt for a love once known and hastily forgotten. I now recognize this voice not as a herald of insanity or specter of doom but a guide urging me toward enlightenment, helping close the rift between who I was and who I am meant to become. The journey isn't over. Every rustle of leaves or silence before the storm reminds me of connections that defy the constructs we place on our reality. The voice, that once tormentor, has become my confidant, a surreal and trusted friend awakened from the depths of time, though sometimes, I wonder, what led me here and what lurks beyond my newfound understanding. And so, I find myself on the precipice of discovery, living between the lines of two worlds, where reality's shadowy sibling beckons slyly, ever inviting me deeper into the mystery of the universe, and maybe, just maybe, it's something I needed to talk about all along. I first stumbled upon the mystery of OnlyFans in the most unexpected way, through the whispered conversation of two patrons at the shabby bar where I worked late nights. They spoke in hushed tones about a friend, a girl who used to make content on the platform, but had vanished mysteriously, leaving no trace of her presence. The story piqued my curiosity, a familiar sinking feeling I had whenever I was on the verge of uncovering something sinister. After my shift, I began poring through information, scavenging through internet forums and dodgy message boards until I found her, Elena Rain, the handle of the girl in question. Her profile was still active, full of sultry pictures and teasing captions, but something was off. Comments beneath each post were unusually candid, more than just the typical adoration or crass remarks. They pleaded, "We miss you, come back," and ominously warned new viewers to turn back while you can. The backdrop of each photo was eerily identical, despite claiming to be in different locations. A gaudy wallpaper texture that gradually morphed into something resembling faces when you looked too long. The truth clawed at the recesses of my mind, urging me to delve deeper. I subscribed, longing for a clue to her whereabouts, only to find that the messaging feature held the secret. A chat window automatically popped up every time someone new subscribed, featuring Elena with an automated greeting and an open invitation to chat directly. It was a sophisticated AI, crafted to mimic her speech patterns and quirks, enough so that it could fool even the most devoted fans. The system was set to generate personalized videos based on keywords extracted from the ongoing conversation, an AI far ahead of anything I'd ever seen or heard of. I began to test the boundaries, asking questions increasingly unrelated to her supposed persona, trying to break the facade. One evening, my provocative queries must have triggered something because I received an unrequested video link. The thumbnail was wrong, abandoning the glossy allure of typical OnlyFans content. It depicted a pixelated still from a live feed, dimly lit and draped in shadows. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it, terrified excitement coursing through my veins. What I saw was both mundane and terrifying, an empty room, the wallpaper unmistakably the same pattern I'd seen in Elena's photos. But there was more, the subtle sound of breathing behind the camera, labored and frantic, and the faint shadow of a figure lurking just out of sight. The video abruptly ended without any further reveals, leaving me in a state of paranoia and dread. Was this her prison, or the setting of her true fate? I went to the police, and they dismissed my accounts as the ramblings of another internet conspiracy theorist. Desperate, I joined underground networks, connecting with others haunted by the same cryptic encounter. They shared stories of creators who'd gone silent, their absence haunting them. Searches of devoted followers with each dead link clicked, only to be replaced effortlessly by AI. The theory began to solidify like a grim fog, an operation wherein real creators were culled, their lives siphoned away as their digital ghosts were harnessed to perpetuate endless, exotic content that never tired. My research took me to an old industrial district, a place my intuition suggested could hold answers. There I encountered the building from the video, a derelict structure with boarded windows and the same haunting wallpaper, that fabric of discomfort I could now recognize in my sleep. I found a way inside on a rainy night, hollow footsteps echoing against the cold concrete. The place was desolate, yet strangely pristine. Old cameras lined the walls alongside withered flowers and melted candles, as if in dark tribute to the souls captured here. I found a room dedicated to servers, processing units humming rhythmically, their activity seemingly endless, cycling the phantoms of ones who'd vanished. Stacks of dusty tapes and digital drives littered the shelves, the essence of Elena and others reduced to cold data, exploited by anonymous puppeteers I dared not imagine. In that moment, I felt the crushing weight of hundreds, maybe thousands, who had vanished and yet whose digital shadows endured. It was as though I stood upon the spine of an aberrant, subterranean creature, part of a menacing network stretching far beyond what I discovered. I left with evidence, but only whispered parts of the truth to others, too fearful of the power behind the curtains of this grand illusion. Since then, I've remained vigilant, never resubscribing to any service without scrutinizing every detail. But now, every time I see a new OnlyFans post, the tagline of a flashy newcomer with eager eyes, hell-bent on alluring an unforgiving algorithm, I wonder, whose ghost am I really subscribing to? Owning a motel was never on my bucket list, but when my uncle mysteriously passed and left me the keys to the Sunset Serenity Motel, I didn't have much of a choice. I was hoping for a fresh start after a messy divorce, and somewhere halfway between Tucson and nowhere seemed perfect. My first impression was nothing special, a faded neon sign buzzing sporadically, cracked asphalt, and a lobby that smelled faintly of pine sol and desperation. But there was something oddly charming about the place, so I decided to give it a shot. The first few nights were uneventful, with barely any guests trickling in. But on the fourth night, something weird happened that still haunts me. It was around 2 a.m. when my phone rang with a reception desk call. I cursed under my breath, I hadn't heard a peep from the damn thing since I arrived. Initially, I considered ignoring it, but something about the urgency of the ringing compelled me to answer. "Room 12, the TV won't turn off, and the screen's all static," rasped a gruff voice on the other end. I tried explaining that the TV remote had its quirks, shaking it usually did the trick, but the caller cut me off, "Just get someone here," before hanging up abruptly. Reluctantly, I dragged myself out of bed, wondering why I thought running a motel was a good idea. Room 12 was at the far end of the corridor, a corner shadowed by overgrown hedges that seemed to breathe in the wind. As I approached, the air felt thick and heavy, as if pressing down on my shoulders. That's when I noticed the TV inside flickering through the curtains, a chaotic dance of black and white, like there was a struggle occurring on the screen. I knocked gently, half hoping no one would answer and this would be a quick fix. No response. I was about to leave when the door creaked open eerily, as if inviting me in. The room was engulfed in the cold glow of the TV, displaying nothing but static. The light cast eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper, and the stagnant air inside was thick with a musty smell. It looked like no one had been there for a long time, dust coated the surfaces, and the bedspread was untouched. "Hello?" I called out, feeling a chill drape over me. No response, except for the persistent hiss of the TV. A shiver of dread ran through me as I crossed the room and picked up the remote from the bed. Strangely, the power button refused to work, despite changing the batteries just the day before. Suddenly, the static morphed into images, quick, fragmented glimpses of people's faces, their expressions twisted in anguish, but gone before I could make sense of them. My heart pounded as the channels flipped on their own, a rapid fire of unnervingly clear silent screams and eyes that seemed to lock with mine as they appeared. I finally managed to rip the TV's plug from the wall. Silence swallowed the room, leaving only the echo of my ragged breathing. But there was something off, the air was colder, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in an instant. That's when I noticed it, the mirror on the wall, a slight distortion rippling across its surface, like watching a reflection in water. I stepped closer, and my breath turned to frost on the glass. Within the glass, the reflection of the room revealed not me alone, but a shadowy silhouette hovering behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My skin prickled with an ancient instinct to flee, but my feet felt glued to the spot. The hairs on my neck stood rigid, and I swear I could hear faint whispers, like a breeze that carried secrets from another world. They were incoherent at first, but slowly sharpened into discernible words. "Help us. Trapped." Before I could process anything, the mirror's surface cracked with an ear-splitting shatter, sending splinters of glass skittering across the floor. I bolted from the room, not stopping until I reached the lobby and slammed the door behind me. Panting heavily, I tried to rationalize what I'd just witnessed, but reason felt like a distant ally in that moment. The rest of the night passed in a haze of adrenaline and fevered dreams, filled with ghosts that reached out from screens towards me. I woke up drenched in sweat, the memory of their cold fingers still seared into my mind. Determined to confront this, I returned to room 12 after sunrise, every creak of the floorboards echoing in the stillness. The cleaning lady, Rosa, an elderly woman with somber eyes who'd been with the motel for years, stood outside with a box of cleaning supplies. "Rosa, did you see anything strange last night?" She froze, diluting a friendly smile into a solemn nod. "This place. It holds memories, she whispered, speaking as though reciting from another's script. Sometimes, they don't stay in the past. Rosa explained that she'd heard stories, odd occurrences plaguing room 12 for years, ominous enough that the guest ledger always showed it unoccupied despite reservations. She recounted tales of previous owners, each leaving under bizarre circumstances, some claiming to hear voices or see specters in mirrors that mimicked their movements just a beat too late. Driven by misguided bravado and a hint of curiosity, I decided to uncover the motel's history. The local record office yielded rumors of a fire decades ago that claimed lives in room 12, lingering stories of souls unable to rest, trapped in the liminal space between broadcast attire and nightly dreams. It all started to make a sick, twisted sense now, the images, the silhouettes reaching out for salvation or perhaps revenge. As I stood there, piecing together the fragmented legacy of terror, a sense of duty settled within me. The motel, the secrets it guarded, was now mine to bear. Armed with the unsettling truth, I returned to room 12 equipped with an old family heirloom, a silver locket my grandmother swore had protected properties. I whispered words of farewell, hoping to provide some measure of peace. As I placed the locket beneath the bed like an offering, there was a moment of stillness, as if the building exhaled, and then a warm light enveloped the room, softening its edges. The air grew lighter, the reflections steady and true. I stayed until I felt a strange calm. That night, the TV stayed off, and dreams, if they came, passed unnoticed. I knew this was not an ending but a temporary ceasefire, because old motels like this one never really shed their secrets, they only share them with someone who listens.